I lit the candle the way I always did, careful, deliberate, shielding the flame from the wind as if it could hear me. That's when a voice rose behind me, soft but certain, and spoke my son's name as if it belonged to them. The cemetery sits on the edge of town where the river bends and the fog never fully lifts, especially in the early mornings. I come every Sunday, alone, carrying a small white candle and the quiet weight of years that never seemed to move forward. My son has been gone for 5 years, and grief has settled into my life like permanent weather. That morning began no differently, until it did. The grass was wet enough to darken my knees through the fabric. Cold seeped in slowly, the way it does when you stay still too long. Morning hadn't fully arrived yet. The sky hovered in that pale gray that feels unfinished, like someone paused the day halfway through. I brushed damp leaves from the marble with the side of my hand. They stuck for a moment before letting go, leaving faint streaks behind. I wiped those away too. I always did. I liked the stone clean. Felt like something small I could still do right. His name caught the weak light first. Carved deep. Certain. I traced it with my thumb, just once, the way I promised myself I wouldn't but always did anyway. The candle sat where I'd left it the week before, sheltered between 2 small rocks. I struck a match and the sound cracked open the quiet. The flame wavered immediately, leaning hard into the wind like it was thinking about leaving. I cupped it with both hands. "Stay," I whispered. Stayed. The wick bent low, blackening at the tip, but it didn't go out. Never did. Some mornings I told myself that meant something. Other mornings I let it be what it was. A flame doing its best. I spoke to him under my breath. Not full sentences. Never those. Just fragments. Things I'd been carrying all week. I told him the house still creaked at night. I told him the neighbor finally fixed the fence he used to complain about. I told him I'd seen his favorite mug at the back of the cabinet and couldn't bring myself to move it. There were other things too. Bigger things. They stayed where they were. A crow called out somewhere behind the trees. The sound stretched thin in the fog, then faded. The cemetery felt suspended, like it was waiting for permission to wake up. No cars yet. No voices. Just breath and earth and the soft sound of the candle burning. Then came the footsteps. At first, they blended into the morning. Gravel shifts. Wind. The mind filling in gaps. But then they came again. Low. Measured. Too close to ignore. I didn't turn right away. People don't usually come this early. And when they do, they understand the quiet. They pass at a distance. They don't interrupt. The steps stopped behind me. Not rushed. Not unsure. I felt the space change before I heard anything else. Like the air tightened. Like something had stepped into my shadow. Then a voice spoke. Clear. She said my son's name. No hesitation. No question at the end. Just his name, placed gently into the silence like it belonged there. My chest tightened before I could think. Quick, sharp pull like something closing. I stood slowly, my knees stiff, my hands numb from the cold. I turned in pieces, careful not to rush whatever this was. She stood a few feet away. Woman. Her coat was dark, buttoned all the way up, like she hadn't dressed for conversation. Her hair was pulled back, neat but tired, a few strands already slipping loose. Her hands were clasped together, fingers pressed hard enough to pale. She didn't look startled to see me. She looked prepared. "I'm sorry," she said after a moment. Her voice was steady, not apologetic enough to be nervous. "I didn't mean to interrupt." Interrupt. The word felt small. "How do you know his name?" Yes. Came out quieter than I expected. No edge. Just a question that had nowhere else to go. Her eyes dropped to the headstone, then lifted back to mine. There was something careful in the way she looked at me. Like she was measuring her steps. "I knew him," she said. The wind moved through the trees then, thinning the fog just enough to change the light. His name brightened on the stone before dulling again. "You knew him," I repeated. She nodded once. "Near the end." Those words landed heavier than the rest. Near the end. A place I lived in now, even if I hadn't chosen it. "I don't recognize you," I said. I know, she replied. You wouldn't. Car passed somewhere beyond the gate. The sound felt distant, like it belonged to another morning entirely. I realized I was still holding the empty matchbox. The smell of sulfur clung to my fingers. I come here sometimes, she said. I didn't know you came this early. How long? Asked. She hesitated. Just long enough. A few months. 5 years. Few months. I glanced at the candle again. The flame bowed toward us, stubborn and small. What do you want? Asked. She shook her head gently. Nothing. Then, after a pause, I just didn't want him to be remembered by only one version of his life. The words stayed with me. Didn't rush past. Didn't demand anything. I turned back toward the stone, toward his name, toward the quiet work of the flame. Behind me she stayed where she was. Didn't move closer. Didn't leave. Morning finally arrived, slow and certain. And for the first time in a long while I felt the beginning of something opening. Not answers. Not peace. Just space. She stood a few paces away, far enough to give the moment room, close enough to matter. The fog softened her edges, made her look like part of the morning instead of someone who had stepped into it. She was dressed plainly. Dark coat, sensible shoes, nothing that asked to be noticed. Her hands were folded in front of her, fingers laced together like she was standing in a place that required reverence. She didn't speak again right away. She looked at the headstone first. Not quickly. Not like a glance. She read my son's name the way people read something they already know, their eyes slowing without realizing it. Then she looked at me. Not to my face at first, but somewhere near my shoulder, as if meeting my eyes too soon might be a kind of trespass. The candle flickered between us. The flame leaned, steadied, leaned again. I waited for an apology. People usually start there. I waited for an explanation. It didn't come. The silence stretched, thin but unbroken. Somewhere water moved. Maybe the river, maybe just runoff slipping through the grass. The cemetery breathed around us. She lifted her eyes finally. They were tired eyes. Not red. Not glassy. Just heavy, like they'd been holding something longer than they were meant to. Who are you? Asked. The question felt simple enough. A name should have fit neatly into the space between us. Something I could hold on to. She didn't answer. Instead, she shifted her weight slightly, then stillness again. Her hands tightened, then relaxed. She took a breath that didn't quite finish. Did you know, she asked carefully, what your son was doing in his last weeks? Her voice was calm. Not accusing. Not dramatic. Just placed. The question landed harder than her name ever could have. I didn't answer right away. The words felt too big to grab all at once. I looked back at the headstone instead, at the clean lines of the letters, at the dates that never seemed to agree with each other no matter how long I stared. I knew where he worked, I said finally. I knew where he lived. Sounded thin even to me. She nodded, as if she'd expected that answer. As if she'd already heard it somewhere else. He didn't talk much about it, she said. It wasn't a question. No, I agreed. He didn't. The fog lifted another inch. The light changed just enough to show the fine cracks in the stone, the ones I pretended not to notice. I realized I was still kneeling. Slowly I stood, brushing dirt from my palms. My joints complained quietly. She stepped back half a pace, instinctive, giving me space as I rose. I noticed then that she smelled faintly of soap and cold air. Nothing else. What do you mean? Asked. His last weeks. She looked down again, this time at the candle. The flame reflected briefly in her eyes. He spent a lot of time helping people, she said. More than anyone realized. That sounds like him, I said, though the words felt rehearsed. If. She tilted her head slightly, considering that. Yes, she said. It does. Another pause. The kind that asks for permission without saying so. I crossed my arms, not because I was cold, but because something in me needed holding together. You still haven't told me who you are. She nodded. I know. She didn't rush. didn't fill the space with nervous details. She let the quiet do its work. "I don't want to be a shock," she said. "That's not why I came." "Then why did you?" asked. Her jaw tightened just enough to notice. She exhaled slowly through her nose. "Because," she said, "I realized one day that if I didn't come speak to you, your son would stay a stranger to you in ways he never deserved. That did something to me. A small shift, barely visible but real." I looked at her again, really looked. At the way she stood, careful not to impose. At the way her eyes kept returning to the stone, like it anchored her. "You knew him well," I said. She hesitated. "I knew him honestly." The word settled. Honest. Not close. Not long. Honest. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the smell of wet earth. The candle guttered but stayed lit. I found myself watching it, the way it refused to give up its place. "What did he do?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer right away. She glanced past me, toward the far end of the cemetery where the trees grew closer together. Her shoulders rose with a breath, then fell. "He listened," she said, "when it would have been easier not to." I thought of my son at the kitchen table, nodding along while someone else talked, his coffee going cold in his hands. I thought of how often I mistook his quiet for distance. She took a step closer now. Not much. Just enough that her presence felt intentional. "There are things," she said, "that don't make it into stories people tell at funerals." I nodded once. The fog was nearly gone now. Morning had fully arrived, unapologetic in its clarity. The cemetery looked ordinary again. Headstones in rows. Birds hopping between them. Life continuing without permission. I turned back to the stone. To the candle. To my son's name, holding steady in the light. Behind me the woman waited. Not pressing. Not leaving. And for the first time since she spoke his name, I understood that this wasn't an interruption. It was an opening. The wind shifted before she spoke again. It moved low across the ground, stirring the grass, carrying the faint smell of river water and old flowers that had been left too long in plastic vases. The kind of scent that belongs to places people visit but don't stay. She drew a breath like she was stepping into colder air. "My name is Elena," she said. The name didn't land anywhere familiar. It didn't echo against memory or settle into an old place. It was simply a sound, carried gently, then released. "I didn't plan to say anything today," she added. "I usually don't." Her voice was steady. Not rehearsed. Not fragile. Just careful, like someone who had practiced keeping certain things from spilling out. I nodded once, though I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to. She glanced past me, toward the far row of stones where the ground dipped slightly, closer to the river. "I come early," she said. "I don't like being seen." That made sense. Cemeteries invite privacy. They also teach you how to disappear. For months, she continued, I'd stand over there. Or sometimes near the gate. I watched you from a distance. The words tightened my chest before I could stop them. Watching was an intimate thing, even when done quietly. "You watched me," I said. She nodded. I didn't want to interrupt. I looked down at the candle again. The flame had shortened, its light steady but smaller now. I wondered how long it had been burning. I wondered how long she'd been standing there before she spoke. "I knew him," she said again, softer this time. "Near the end." The phrase returned like a bruise you press without meaning to. Near the end. That narrow stretch of time that belonged to him alone, whether I liked it or not. "Not in the way you might imagine," she added quickly, as if she could hear where my thoughts were going. I didn't answer. I didn't know how. My hands had gone cold, though the morning had warmed. The wind carried another scent then, damp soil, something metallic from the riverbank. The flowers near his grave rustled, their stems clicking lightly against the glass jar I'd brought them in. "He helped me," she said. "That's all." Helped. The word felt too small, too neat. She shifted her weight, then stopped herself, settling back into stillness. "He didn't talk about you much," she said, then paused. "I don't mean that the way it sounds." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. He wasn't much of a talker, I said. No, she agreed. But he listened. That landed somewhere deeper. She told me he used to sit with his hands folded, elbows on his knees, like he was bracing himself to stay present. She said he asked questions that didn't pry, the kind that left room for people to answer honestly or not at all. She said he never rushed her, even when time was thin. I pictured him that way easily. Too easily. It felt like remembering something I'd overlooked on purpose. He came here once with me, she said, gesturing vaguely around us. Not to this spot. Just here. I looked at the ground, trying to imagine his footsteps where mine now stood. The idea of him standing in this place, breathing this air, without me knowing, it settled heavy. I didn't know, I said. She shook her head. I don't think you were meant to. That hurt more than if she'd said nothing. The wind picked up again, tugging lightly at her coat, lifting a loose strand of hair across her face. She didn't brush it away. He had a way of keeping things separate, she said. Not secret. Just protected. Protected. From what? From who? I thought of his bedroom door closed late at night. Of the way he smiled when I asked how his day was, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Of all the times I accepted that smile as enough. If you knew him then, I said slowly, what part of his life was I missing? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at the headstone again, reading his name like it was a sentence she still hadn't finished. You weren't missing him, she said finally. You were just seeing him from where you stood. That felt like mercy, even if I wasn't sure I deserved it. The candle guttered suddenly, bending hard toward the wind. I reached down instinctively, shielding it with my palm. The flame steadied again, smaller now but alive. She watched that, her eyes following the movement of my hand. He cared about you, she said. That much was clear. I nodded. I believed her. Or maybe I needed to. The river sounded louder now. Or maybe I was finally listening for it. The morning had moved on without asking us. Sunlight slipped through the trees in narrow bands, catching on the edges of stone. Elena took a step back, just a fraction. Not leaving. Just making space. I didn't mean to change anything, she said. I just didn't want you to think this was all he was. She gestured gently toward the grave. The candle. The quiet. I stood there longer than I meant to. Letting her words settle. Letting the questions form without forcing answers. When I finally looked up again, she was still there. Waiting. The way she said she always did. And I realized something then. That the part of my son I didn't know wasn't gone. It was standing just a few paces away, asking softly to be seen. The stone bench was colder than it looked. Even through my coat, I felt it pull the warmth out of me, slow and deliberate. The fog still hung low around the cemetery, but the light had begun to press through it, thinning the edges of things. Shapes sharpened. Headstones stopped being silhouettes and became names again. We sat side by side, not touching. Close enough to hear each other breathe. For a while, neither of us spoke. The quiet felt earned, like something that needed to settle before words could survive it. Somewhere down the hill, a lawn mower coughed to life, then fell silent again. The day was waking up in pieces. She rubbed her hands together once, then folded them in her lap. He volunteered, she said. The word landed softly. Not dramatic. Just factual. At a night shelter across town, she continued. Not every night. But often enough that people noticed when he wasn't there. I pictured the place immediately, even though I'd never been inside. The old brick building near the river. Windows always fogged. A line out front in the colder months. I'd driven past it more times than I could count without slowing down. What did he do there? I asked. She smiled then. Not wide. Not bright. Just a small movement, like a memory passing through her. Whatever needed doing, she said. Fixed doors that didn't close right. Replaced light bulbs. Sat with people when they couldn't sleep. I looked down at my hands. They rested on my knees. Still, familiar. My son's hands had always been busy. Tapping. Fixing. Adjusting things no one else noticed were off. He didn't talk much, she said. But he stayed. Stayed. That felt important. She told me about a door at the shelter that swelled in damp weather, stuck halfway no matter how hard you pushed. She said my son spent an entire evening sanding it down by hand, quiet, patient, stopping now and then to check the fit. He could have left it for someone else, she said. But he didn't. I imagined him there. Sleeves rolled up. Head bent. Focused. The way he used to fix things around the house without asking for help or praise. He listened to stories. She went on. Ones people didn't tell twice. He never rushed them. The light shifted again, sliding across the bench, warming one side of my leg while the other stayed cold. I stayed still, letting it happen. Did he ever talk about us? I asked. The word us felt strange in my mouth. Smaller than it used to be. She shook her head gently. Not much. I nodded. I'd expected that. He didn't avoid you, she added. He just kept himself out of it. Out of what? He didn't like being the subject, she said. If someone asked him why he came, he'd shrug. Change the subject. Ask them how their coffee was. That sounded like him. Too much like him. I thought of all the dinners where I'd asked about his day. How easily I'd accepted short answers. How relieved I'd been not to push. The fog lifted enough for the sun to show its edge. Light spilled across the tops of the stones, catching on dates, on names worn smooth by weather and hands. How long was he doing this? I asked. She looked at the ground. Counted silently. Months, she said. Maybe longer. Months. I swallowed. My grief had always felt complete. Heavy. Whole. Like a closed door I leaned against every day. But now, sitting there, it shifted. Not lighter. Just different. Like I'd been carrying only part of it without knowing. He never told me, I said. She nodded. I know. There was no judgment in her voice. No surprise. He didn't want it to be a thing, she said. He just wanted to help. A bird landed on a nearby stone, hopped once, then flew off again. The sound of its wings startled me more than it should have. I thought of my son's jacket hanging in the hall closet. The pockets I'd never checked. The smell that still lingered if I pressed my face into the fabric. What else? I asked quietly. She hesitated. Not because she didn't know what to say, but because she was deciding how much. He was tired, she said finally. But not the kind of tired that makes you complain. That hit somewhere deep. He'd sit for a while before leaving, she continued. Just breathing. Like he was holding something together. The bench creaked faintly as I shifted my weight. The stone remembered us, or maybe it didn't. Maybe it never forgot anyone. I realized then how narrow my picture of his final months had been. Work. Home. Sleep. A loop I could manage. A version of him that fit inside my fear. And all this time, there had been nights. Other rooms. Other people carrying pieces of him I never held. Was my grief wrong? I asked. The question slipped out before I could stop it. She turned toward me fully then. Really looked at me. No, she said. But it wasn't finished. That felt true in a way that scared me. The sun finally broke through the fog completely, lighting the bench, warming the stone beneath us. The cemetery looked ordinary again. Peaceful. Almost gentle. I sat there, letting the warmth reach me, wondering how much of my son's life I'd missed by standing too close to my own pain. And as we rose from the bench, the question stayed with me. Not loud. Not accusing. Just waiting. What else was there to know? The windows were fogged so thick I couldn't see inside. Just shapes moving slowly behind the glass. Shadows bending, passing, stopping. The kind of warmth you can feel before you touch the door. I stood on the sidewalk longer than necessary. The river was only a block away, close enough that the air carried its damp metal smell. Afternoon light slid low between buildings, catching on puddles left from the morning fog. Cars passed, tires hissing softly, the world continuing without noticing where I was standing. The shelter looked tired. paint chipped near the doorframe. A sign that had been cleaned too many times to stay bright. It wasn't the kind of place that asked to be remembered. I pushed the door open. Warmth met me immediately. Not just heat, sound. Low voices. A radio playing something old and gentle. The smell of coffee that had been sitting too long on the burner, mixed with soap and something faintly metallic, like keys or coins. The floor creaked beneath my shoes. It sounded like it remembered everyone who had walked across it. I stood there unsure, hands clasped in front of me the way people do when they don't know where to put themselves. A man behind the desk looked up. He had grey in his beard and lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled. "Can I help you?" he asked. His voice was calm, used to questions. I swallowed. "I'm looking for information," I said. "About someone who volunteered here." He nodded once, already listening. I said my son's name. The change was immediate. Not dramatic. Just a softening. His shoulders eased. His eyes shifted, like he was looking past me for a second. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I remember him." The word remember hit harder than I expected. "You do?" I asked. "Every Thursday," he said. "Rain or shine." He said it like it was a fact he'd checked often enough to trust. I glanced around the room. The worn chairs pushed against the walls. A bulletin board layered with old flyers. A stack of mismatched mugs near the coffee machine. "He came after work," the man continued. "Didn't matter if it was late." I nodded, though my chest felt tight. Thursdays. I pictured my son leaving the house those nights, keys in hand, jacket zipped, saying he'd be late. I never asked why. "What did he do?" I asked. The man smiled then. Not wide. Not for show. "Whatever needed doing," he said. "Fixing doors. Tightening hinges. Listening." Listening. The word followed me again. "He wasn't loud," the man said. "Didn't take up space. But when he was here, things felt steadier." Steadier. I held on to that. He told me about the front door that used to stick in winter. About the light in the back hall that flickered until my son climbed a ladder and fixed it without being asked. About the way people waited for him on Thursdays, not because he promised anything, but because he showed up. He had patience, the man said. Real patience. The kind that doesn't make a show of itself. I looked down at the counter. The wood was scratched and smooth at the same time, worn by hands resting there, leaning there, staying a moment longer than planned. Did he talk about home? I asked. The man shook his head slowly. Not much. That felt familiar. He talked about fixing things, he added. Said it helped him think. I imagined my son here, sleeves rolled up, brow furrowed just slightly, focused. The version of him that existed when no one was watching. Was he happy? I asked. The question came out smaller than I intended. The man didn't answer right away. He leaned back in his chair, considering. He was present, he said finally. That's what I noticed. Present. I nodded. I didn't trust myself to speak. A woman passed behind us carrying a basket of towels. She glanced at me, then smiled gently, like she knew why I was there without being told. The radio crackled softly. Somewhere, a kettle clicked off. He kept to himself, the man said. But people trusted him. Trusted him. I thought of my son at the dinner table, quiet, nodding along. I'd mistaken his silence for distance. I'd never considered it might be a kind of offering. He stopped coming a few weeks before. The man paused, respectful. Before he died. My throat tightened. He said he was tired, the man continued. But he said it like it was temporary. Temporary. So many things had sounded that way. I thanked him. The words felt insufficient but necessary. He nodded, understanding that too. When I stepped back outside, the air felt cooler. Sharper. The fog had lifted completely now, leaving the street bare and honest. The river moved nearby, unseen but present, its sound threading through the traffic. I stood there again, just outside the door, listening to the muffled life inside the shelter. Cups clinking. A laugh. Someone calling out a name. My son's life had stretched further than I'd known. Past my kitchen door. Past my questions. Into places that smelled like coffee and soap and quiet work done without witnesses. I pictured him leaving the house on those Thursday nights. Turning the key. Stepping into the dark. Carrying a version of himself I never asked to see. As I walked back toward my car, the question stayed with me. Not accusing. Not angry. Just heavy. What else had lived in the hours after he left my house each night? The house was quiet in the middle of the afternoon. Not the deep quiet of night, but the thin kind, where sounds still exist, they're just careful. The refrigerator hummed. Pipes ticked once behind the wall, then settled. Sunlight slid across the floor and stopped halfway, like it had forgotten what it came for. I stood in my son's old room with the door half open. I hadn't meant to come in here. My feet had brought me without asking. The air smelled faintly of dust and something familiar I couldn't name anymore. I opened the dresser drawer closest to the door. It stuck the way it always had. I pulled harder than necessary. The wood groaned, then gave in. Inside were things I hadn't touched in years. Socks folded the way he used to fold them. A belt with a cracked buckle. Old receipts curled at the edges like they'd been waiting. I didn't know what I was looking for. Just something I might have missed. I moved slowly, drawer by drawer, the way you do when you don't want to disturb whatever's been sleeping. Each one felt like a small permission I wasn't sure I'd earned. At the bottom of the last drawer, beneath a stack of notebooks, I found the one with the torn blue cover. His handwriting ran along the edge in faded ink. I remembered buying it for him. I remembered thinking he'd never fill it. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. Most of the pages were blank. A few lists. A phone number without a name. A grocery list crossed out twice. Nothing that felt like a secret. Then, in the back, something slipped loose. A photograph folded small enough to hide. I picked it up carefully, like it might tear just from being seen. The paper was soft from being handled, the crease pressed deep down the middle. When I unfolded it, my breath caught, not sharply, just enough to notice. It was my son. He stood by the river, one hand in his jacket pocket, the other hanging loose at his side. The water behind him was dark, restless, catching light in broken lines. He looked older somehow. Not different. Just fuller. Someone stood beside him. Or had stood. The edge of the photograph cut them off completely. A shoulder. Part of an arm. Nothing more. I turned the photo slightly, as if changing the angle might bring the rest of them back. It didn't. I studied his face. The set of his mouth. The way his eyes weren't quite smiling, but weren't tired either. He looked steady. Like someone who had made a quiet decision and was standing inside it. I flipped the photograph over. A date, written in pen. Weeks before he died. I sat there longer than I meant to, the notebook open on my lap, the photo resting against my palm. The room felt smaller with it there. More honest. I tried to remember that day. What I'd been doing. Whether he'd come home late. Whether I'd asked where he'd been. I couldn't. That bothered me more than the photograph itself. I traced the edge where the other person should have been. The cut was clean. Intentional. Not torn. Someone had chosen what stayed and what didn't. Why didn't you tell me? I said aloud, before realizing I'd spoken. The room didn't answer. I thought about the shelter. About the woman at the cemetery. About all the Thursdays that had slipped past me unnoticed. My grief had been so loud back then, even before he was gone. I'd been listening only to myself. I looked at his face again. There was something there I hadn't seen before. Not happiness exactly. Not relief. Purpose. It scared me how easily I recognized it now. I folded the photograph carefully, pressing the crease back into place. For a moment, I considered unfolding it again, flattening it, letting the other person remain gone. But I didn't. I slid it back into the notebook, then stopped. Instead, I placed it on the bed beside me. The house creaked softly, like it was shifting its weight. Outside, a car passed, tires whispering against the street. Someone laughed down the block. Life moving on without checking first. I realized then that my son had been carrying parts of his life alone. Not because he didn't trust me, but because he didn't know how to make room for everything in one place. And I had let him. I closed the notebook and rested my hand on it. The cover was cool, smooth in a way that felt final. As the afternoon light slid further across the floor, I kept seeing the space beside him in the photograph. The person who had been close enough to stand there. Close enough to matter. Who were you? I wondered. And why did my son think I wasn't ready to see you? The question stayed with me as the light faded. Quiet. Unfinished. Waiting for the rest of the picture to step into view. The message came just after noon. A simple request. She asked if we could meet again, back where we first spoke, before the light faded. By the time I reached the cemetery, the sun sat low and pale, dulled by thin cloud. The air smelled like rain that hadn't decided yet. I stood near my son's grave with my hands in my coat pockets, feeling the small, familiar weight of the keys I still carried for a house he no longer entered. She was already there. She stood a few steps away from the stone, not facing it. Just standing, as if she didn't want to look until she knew she had permission. Her shoulders were tense, her posture tighter than before. "I'm glad you came," she said. She didn't look at me when she said it. We sat on the low concrete edge near the path. The bench was damp, but neither of us mentioned it. The wind moved through the trees overhead, stirring leaves that never quite settled. "I didn't tell you everything," she said. I nodded. I had expected that. She folded her hands together, then unfolded them, then folded them again. Her fingers shook slightly, like they were remembering something before she spoke. "He helped me leave," she said. The words came out small. Careful. A place I couldn't stay anymore. I didn't ask where. I didn't need to. Her eyes stayed fixed on the ground, on the line of ants moving through the dirt, on anything but my face. "He never asked questions," she continued. "He didn't need details. He just said I could sleep on his couch until I figured things out." I thought of my son's couch. The worn armrest. The throw blanket folded neatly over the back. I'd sat there once, years ago, laughing at something on television neither of us remembered now. "He gave me food," she said. "Clean towels. Quiet. Quiet. He had always been good at that. He never told anyone," she added quickly. "I don't think he even thought of it as something to tell." Her voice wavered then, just slightly. She paused, swallowing, steadying herself. "I stayed 3 nights. The wind picked up, rattling the branches overhead. Somewhere nearby, gravel crunched as someone walked past, their footsteps respectful but real. Life moving through grief without stopping. "I wanted to leave sooner," she said. "I didn't want to be a burden." I almost told her she hadn't been. The words rose automatically. But I stopped them. They weren't mine to give. "The night he died," she said, her voice dropping, "I was with him." I felt the ground tilt, just a fraction. She pressed her lips together, then released them slowly. "We were walking near the river. He said he wanted to make sure I got back safely." I closed my eyes briefly. Just long enough to see it. The path. The dark water. His stride matching someone else's without thinking about it. "There was an argument earlier that day," she continued. "Not with him. With where I came from." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. "He listened," she said. "Like he always did. He told me I wasn't weak for leaving." Her hands clenched together now. Her knuckles went pale. "And then I left him," she whispered. The sentence broke apart between us. "I panicked," she said. "I thought if I stayed, everything would come back. The police. Questions. I told myself he was fine. That he'd walk home like he always did." Her voice shook openly now, but she didn't cry. The guilt sat heavier than tears ever could. "I heard the sirens later," she said. "From my room. I knew." I stared at the ground, at the darkening soil near my shoes. My son's name carved into stone behind us, steady and unmoving. "I didn't come back," she said. "I couldn't." The silence stretched. Not empty. Full. "If I had stayed," she asked quietly, Would he still be alive? The question hovered between us. Fragile. Unanswerable. I thought of the river. Of how unforgiving water can be. Of all the moments in life that turn without asking permission. I don't know, I said honestly. She nodded, as if she hadn't expected anything else. I live with that, she said. Every day. The wind softened. The trees settled. A single leaf fell and landed near her shoe. He never blamed anyone, I said, surprising myself. She looked up then. Really looked at me. No, she said. He didn't. We sat there longer after that. The light dimmed, turning the cemetery into shades of grey and blue. The headstones blurred at the edges again. When she stood to leave, she hesitated. I didn't come for forgiveness, she said. I just couldn't let you think he died alone. That mattered more than I expected. She walked away slowly, not rushing, not looking back. I stayed where I was, listening to her footsteps fade into the quiet. I turned toward my son's grave then. Toward the name that held so many versions of him. If she hadn't walked away, would he still be alive? The question stayed with me as the evening settled. Heavy. Unanswered. Waiting for something like mercy to find its place. The river was louder than I remembered. Not the gentle murmur I thought of from childhood, but a living thing, swollen with rain, angry and dark. The light was fading, grey and heavy, pressing into every corner of the cemetery as if it, too, knew the story waiting for me. She stood a few feet away, coat buttoned tight, hands clasped in front of her. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying a faint scent of wet earth and old leaves. She didn't look at me at first. Just waited. I'll try to tell you, she said softly. As best I can. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was ready. She began in fragments. The night had been wet. Rain falling hard, sliding down streets, pooling in gutters. My son had insisted on walking her halfway home. She had protested, but he would not hear it. He was quiet, patient, steady, like he always was. She spoke of the embankment near the river. The mud slick underfoot. How easily it gave way. He slipped, she said. I tried to grab him, but, her voice broke. She swallowed, trying to gather what remained of her courage. I couldn't. I could hear the memory pressing against her words, shaping them into silence where sound should have been. My scream, she said. It was swallowed. By water. By darkness. By everything. She paused, the wind picking up, rattling branches overhead. I pictured the river then, the dark water, rushing, unstoppable, taking everything with it. The official report said accident. No witnesses stayed. No one to argue. No one left to tell the story that mattered. I felt a tide rise in my chest. Anger, yes. But it tangled with understanding. The river had its own voice. My son had acted with his usual carefulness. And still, it was not enough. She described the moments before. His hand brushing hers, guiding her down the muddy path. His jacket clinging wetly to his frame. His quiet insistence that she would be safe. He didn't complain, she said. Even when the rain soaked him through. He just kept walking. I imagined him there. Strong. Determined. Quiet. And then gone. Her words slowed, as if the memory demanded space. I didn't stay, she said. I panicked. I felt the weight of her guilt in the air, pressing against my chest. I didn't know if it was for her, for him, or for me, but it pressed anyway. The river had no memory of blame. It didn't care who was right or wrong. It moved. Took. Was. They said it was an accident, I whispered, though I was sure she heard. Yes, she said. Her eyes were wet. But she stopped herself, pressed her lips together. I wonder sometimes if I shouldn't have stayed. And I wondered. I wondered what it meant to hold on to anger when the person you wanted to blame had been careful, steady, kind. How could you hold on to resentment against someone who had always tried to do the right thing? I imagined the river again. Its dark water curling over rocks, over logs, over the shapes of things that didn't belong. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't deliberate. But it took what it would. I can't stop thinking, she said quietly. About that night. About everything. The words pressed against me. Not asking for forgiveness. Not seeking absolution. Just confession, carried on wet air. I stared at her hands, clasped tightly in front of her, knuckles white. I saw the tremor in her fingers, the tiny shake that belied her calm voice. The cemetery was quiet around us. Not empty, but hushed, waiting. The sun had dipped lower. Shadows grew long and cold. The grass whispered under a soft breeze. I thought of my son, of his patience, of his quiet insistence on doing right, even when the world was loud, even when the rain threatened. Was there anyone left to blame at all? I said softly. She shook her head. Not in despair. Just a gentle acknowledgement of truth. No, she said. I don't think there was. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of memory, of water rushing, of footsteps in mud, of a hand extended too late. I closed my eyes for a moment. Let the image of him on that embankment take form. Strong. Gentle. Unyielding even in the end. The river's roar seemed to echo in my ears. Not threatening, not accusatory. Just alive. Just moving. She looked at me then. Really looked. Her gaze was heavy, but steady. I never meant, she started. Stopped. The words hung, unfinished, unneeded. I reached out, almost, and didn't. Instead, I let the moment rest. Let the river and the memory rest with us. The wind shifted. A leaf fell between us. Dark, wet. It landed near my shoe and stayed. I breathed in. Exhaled slowly. The world kept moving, even after the river had taken what it would. And I realized that night, that grief, that anger, they didn't have to be resolved. Not yet. They only had to exist. Quiet, honest, present. I stood finally. She remained seated a moment longer, watching me. The cemetery grew colder. Shadows stretched. The river's voice lingered in my ears, carrying both loss and a strange, impossible peace. I walked toward the path out, leaving her with the memory. The question stayed with me. If there had been another choice, would anything have changed at all? The candle sits where I left it, unlit. Its wax has hardened just enough to show the last time it burned. The wick bends slightly to the side, stubborn. I pass it sometimes, just to check it's still there. The flame doesn't come. The light doesn't rise. Not yet. I avoid the cemetery these days. I avoid the gravel paths and the low, stoic headstones. I let the wind sweep the leaves over the marble, let the sun slide across its surface without interruption. The world continues without me showing up to watch it. The house feels different in the quiet. Rooms are too large. Air hangs heavy. I replay the moments of his life like an old film, worn at the edges. His laughter at the kitchen table. The way he folded his socks in the drawer. The silence when he didn't answer a question I didn't know to ask. I walk through the living room slowly, touching surfaces without really looking. A mug still warm from morning coffee. A blanket left folded over the couch arm. Light spills through the blinds in a pale pattern, moving across the floor like it remembers something I have forgotten. Her voice lingers. The woman from the cemetery. Her words about the shelter, about the nights he helped her, about the river. I hear them in the spaces between the furniture, in the quiet of the kitchen, in the hum of the refrigerator. Grief has shifted in me. It has hardened, taking shape along the edges of memory. Sharper now. Cold. More precise. Not the soft ache I imagined at first. Something with angles. Something that can slice even in silence. I sit in my son's old chair, knees drawn up. I fold my hands loosely over them and close my eyes. I trace every image I have of him, every gesture, every fleeting smile. Trying to find where I missed him. Where I failed to see. I see him at the river. I see him at the shelter. I see him in our kitchen. Quiet but full of life. I notice the spaces between. The moments I wasn't there. The moments I didn't ask. My throat tightens. I think of the nights he left without explanation, the Thursdays he spent elsewhere. I think of the woman, her eyes full of recognition, full of guilt, full of something she couldn't speak aloud. Can forgiveness exist without someone to forgive? I don't know. I fold the question carefully, like it might break if handled too roughly. It sits in my chest. Heavy. Waiting. I move through the house slowly, opening drawers I haven't touched in years. Not looking for anything, just remembering. Each object a reminder that he was here, and gone. Socks folded, notebooks untouched, pens uncapped but empty. I stop by the window, watching rain begin to fall. It streaks down the glass in uneven lines, tracing paths that look like the ones my grief has taken. Every droplet carries a memory I didn't realize I was holding. I see his photograph on the dresser. Him by the river, someone cropped out of frame. The image has followed me home, quietly. I touch the corner of it, the paper soft beneath my fingers, and the ache comes back, steady and familiar. I remember the sound of her voice, his patience, his quiet insistence on doing right. The hands he extended, the doors he fixed, the people he sheltered, the life he carried beyond my view. The candle remains unlit. I stare at it, thinking of flame, of warmth, of illumination. I think of him. And I realize the light doesn't come from the wick anymore. It comes from remembering, from tracing every piece of him I can still touch. Grief is no longer soft. It has edges now. But edges can guide. They can point to things I missed, things I can hold without possession. They can teach me that absence is not nothing. That memory is not empty. That forgiveness may exist, even if the person I would forgive cannot hear it. I lift the candle. It feels heavier than it is. My fingers press against the wax. I imagine lighting it, but I do not. Not yet. Instead, I sit with it. I let it rest in my hands as the rain continues, tapping softly against the window. The world outside is quiet, wet, alive. And I let my grief sit beside me, unspoken but present. I hear her words again. He never asked for thanks. I understand that now. I understand that the life he lived, the care he gave, the silence he carried, none of it required acknowledgement. It simply existed. And so must my memory of him. The house exhales. The air shifts. Shadows lengthen along the walls. The candle tilts slightly in my grasp, but I do not set it down. I close my eyes. And in that darkness, I feel a small truth. The flame doesn't have to burn to be remembered. The light is already here, held in me, waiting for the day I am ready to let it shine. Outside, the rain slides down the glass, tracing paths that are messy, uneven, impossible to straighten. I think of the river, of his hands, of her story. And I know that grief can coexist with memory, and memory with love, even when anger and guilt have nowhere to go. I set the candle on the windowsill. Not lit. Not forgotten. Just present. And I wait. The flame will come. Eventually. The sky is bruised with the last light of day. Shadows stretch long across the cemetery, softening the edges of the headstones. The air smells of damp earth and cold stone. I carry 2 candles this time, their wax smooth and unbroken, a small weight in my hands. Each step across the gravel crunches lightly under my shoes. The sound feels louder than it should. She is there, already. Standing a few paces away, hesitant. Hands clasped loosely in front of her, shoulders rounded like she's carrying more than I can see. She doesn't step closer. She doesn't speak. She just watches, as if waiting for permission to exist in this space beside my grief. I kneel slowly beside his grave. The marble is cool beneath my fingers, slick with the evening dew. I set the candles down carefully, side by side, and strike the matches one by one. The flames catch, small and bright against the growing darkness. They wobble in the wind for a moment before finding balance, steady. I watch them. The light flickers over the engraved letters of his name, and for the first time in a long while, it feels like he is here, not gone, not lost, but present in the glow that touches the curves of the stone. She remains silent, watching from the edge. I glance at her. You can stay, I tell her. My voice is quiet, deliberate, almost more a suggestion than an invitation. You don't have to disappear anymore. She steps closer, slowly, her boots crunching softly on the gravel. The distance between us shrinks, but not too fast. Her presence feels fragile, like she might vanish if I reach for her. The wind stirs, moving leaves along the paths. The branches overhead sway lightly, brushing against each other in whispers. I notice the way the candlelight dances across her face, catching in her eyes. Recognition, relief, guilt, all of it wrapped into one. I speak again, this time to him. My boy, I whisper, letting the words float over the marble. I've carried so much. I didn't know how to let it go. The candles sway gently. Shadows stretch, merging with the darkening sky. I feel the tightness in my chest begin to loosen. She doesn't interrupt. She doesn't try to fill the silence. She only sits down on the edge of the grass nearby, leaving space for me, for him, for whatever this moment is supposed to be. I breathe in the air around us, the smell of wet soil, the faint hint of flowers left by strangers on nearby graves, the cold metal of the candle holders. I feel the weight I've carried for so long shift slightly, as if finally allowed to breathe. We sit like that for a while. The world moves around us. Cars hum faintly in the distance. A bird calls somewhere unseen. The evening grows darker, the shadows deepen. Yet the candle flames remain steady, a small defiance against the night. I look at her then, really look. She hasn't spoken, yet her presence says everything. She has come to share the space, to honor him, to carry some of what I could not. Her eyes meet mine briefly. I nod. She nods back. Something loosens inside me, soft, careful, but undeniably there. The years of guilt, the nights of questioning, the sharp edges of grief, they all seem a little less heavy. I realize that perhaps peace doesn't arrive suddenly. Perhaps it begins quietly, in small acts of presence, in shared space, in the simple lighting of 2 candles. I let my hand rest on the cool marble. Thank you, I whisper. Not to her, not to me, not even to him. Just letting the words exist in the space between us. The candles flicker again. Shadows lean closer, blending with the encroaching darkness. The sky is a deep indigo now. Stars begin to pierce the edges, shy and tentative. She doesn't move yet. She simply watches, breathing slowly. I realize she is giving herself permission to stay, permission to remember, to witness, to exist without apology. I straighten, brushing off my knees. The evening air is sharp against my cheeks, but it feels alive, real, honest. Let's not hurry, I say softly. We don't have to. The candle flames catch in her eyes again. I feel the heaviness in my chest ease further. The tight coil of grief, the constant questioning, the lingering shadows, all of it softens, just enough to allow for hope. The wind shifts. A leaf flutters down between the 2 candles, landing gently on the marble. The movement is small, but it feels like the world acknowledging the quiet moment we are sharing. I glance back at the graves around us. The stones stand silent, witnesses to the passing of time, the resilience of memory, the quiet endurance of those left behind. And then I look at the candles once more. 2 flames. Steady. Warm. Alive. I realize this might be the beginning. Not the end. Not a resolution. But a start. The woman sits beside me now, just close enough for her presence to be felt. Not imposing. Not intruding. Just there. I breathe. Deep. Slow. The tightness in my chest loosens further. The weight I've carried begins to settle. For the first time in years, the word peace doesn't feel impossible. The sky darkens completely. Stars punctuate the horizon. The wind sighs softly. 2 flames burn. And I let them, and myself, exist in their light. The cemetery is quiet. The trees sway gently, their branches brushing against each other, whispering to the wind. The river beyond hums a low, constant murmur, carrying the sound of water over rocks and roots. The candle flickers softly beside the headstone, the flame steady now in the evening air. Its glow spreads across the marble, painting the carved letters gold in the fading light. I sit beside it, knees drawn close, hands resting lightly on my thighs. My son's name catches in the reflection of the flame, steady and familiar. I trace it with my eyes, letting each curve and edge sink in. The light is warm against the chill of the evening. The wind carries the scent of wet leaves, damp earth, and something faintly floral from a bouquet left on a nearby grave. I breathe it in slowly, letting it mix with the quiet hum of the river and the soft creak of the fence at the edge of the cemetery. I think of my son. Not the son I imagined in the quiet emptiness after he was gone. Not the one frozen in grief. But the one I've come to know through pieces, through fragments of nights he spent helping others, through small acts of kindness that never reached my view. The weight in my chest has changed. It is still there, yes, but less pressing, less sharp. The edges of grief have softened enough that I can fold them back without fear of breaking. I realize now how much of him lived quietly, fully, beyond my reach, and how little that diminishes the love I hold. I watch the candlelight dance. It flares once, wavers in the breeze, then steadies. Shadows stretch along the grass, brushing the neighboring stones. I let my mind wander over the days I thought were empty, the nights I replayed in isolation. They weren't empty. They were full of things I never saw. Things that spoke quietly of who he was. He fixed doors no one thanked him for. He listened to people whose stories never left the shelter. He walked someone home, carried their fear like his own. And all the while, he carried life within himself, steady, patient, undemanding. I feel a faint ache. Not the raw, gnawing grief I've carried. Something gentler. A hollowed space filled with recognition. With understanding. With a strange comfort that comes from finally seeing truth. I close my eyes for a moment. I can hear the river clearer now, and the distant rustle of leaves. The candle flickers. I feel him there, not as absence, but presence, threaded through the acts I never knew, the moments I couldn't witness. Time stretches. The world outside the cemetery continues, but here it slows, bends around memory and flame. I think of the woman who spoke of him, who shared fragments of his final months. Who reminded me that life carries on quietly, and that we often don't see the lives we touch. Her words echo in the hush of this place, and I feel the full scope of his life at once. Tender, deliberate, unnoticed in ways that mattered most. Loss remains. It always will. But it no longer feels unfinished. There is completeness in knowing. In acknowledgement. In letting the light fall across what was, what is, and what memory preserves. I trace the outline of the stone again. My fingers linger on its cool surface. I imagine the warmth of his hand, the gentle pressure of presence he offered others. I smile faintly. Not with laughter, not with sound, but with recognition. I stand slowly. The grass brushes against my ankles. The candle flames bend in the slight evening breeze but remain steady. I take a last look at the stone, at the glow that spreads across it, at the shadows stretching behind it. I think of the truths we carry quietly, tucked beneath our grief, waiting for attention. How many of them linger in silence, just beyond the edges of our loss? Waiting to be seen. Waiting to be acknowledged. Waiting to make the grief whole. The river hums behind the trees. Its voice is steady, familiar, patient. It moves on, even when we do not. I feel its quiet insistence mirrored inside me, a reminder that life continues, layered and complex, even through sorrow. I step toward the path. Gravel shifts softly beneath my shoes. The candlelight flickers once more before I leave it behind, steady, still, holding the space I have occupied. The cemetery exhales. The wind shifts. Shadows lean closer. And yet, the flame persists. I take a breath. Deep. Slow. The ache is lighter. The grief is quieter. The memory is full. And I wonder, as I walk away, how many truths wait just beyond the grief, quietly asking to be spoken. The stars begin to pierce the darkened sky. The river hums on. The candle burns, steady in the quiet night. I do not look back. Not yet. But I carry the light with me.